Welcome back to Red Panda Destiny. We are starting our 1971 series on what Dad's Army was up to in 1971. Wasn't actually that much. It was the film and a Christmas special. So about 2.5 hours of content. Today, of course, we are doing the movie. Kind of weird. Apparently, this was a regular thing for British sitcoms at the time. Eventually, if they were successful enough, they made it into a movie. I'm not sure if they all did it the way Dad's Army did it, with resetting the whole plot, but I don't know. But yeah, this is going to be a full overview of this film. Just want to start off and say that I don't like the film compared to the TV show, and even the writers don't like the film compared to the TV show. It didn't really work as well as the show itself did. But let's get into it. I mean, the movie starts with some Nazis drive up in a staff car, get out the binoculars, and look across the channel. It's like, first of all, you can't see Britain from France, I'm pretty sure. So, but then they see the platoon on the other side above the white cliffs, classic British white cliffs. I don't think the Nazis should have been shown in this movie. That's one of the major things that they added. And I like them more as sort of a faceless enemy that they don't know anything about. So I'm giving them a negative for that, though their inclusion will get some positives because later on there are some funny jokes to do with them. I will give a positive, though, for the theme song. Same theme from the TV show. It's epic. I talked about that in the overview episode. Love it. Then they did a scene. Oh, no, I don't want to say scene. They showed some random Nazi marching footage. I'm kind of neutral on that. It's actually kind of interesting, though, because that's what they were originally going to do for the TV show as the opening instead of the twiddly lines, which you can actually see a still of in this video. That's what those little arrows with Nazis on them is. They used to just, the British would come across the channel and Nazis would chase them back. And it's just a very simple animation. I really prefer it to showing black and white footage of Nazis marching around everywhere. Then I'm going to give a negative to the reset. They reset the whole plot, restarted it, and it's like, couldn't you just use the characters you already have? Did you really need to waste must be at least 30 minutes of the film when you could have just watched the first episode? And it's like, Dad's Army was one of the biggest shows on television in the UK in the early 70s. Most people have probably seen it and don't need to be reminded of what it is. So that seems kind of insulting to the viewer, in my opinion. But then I do like how they introduce the characters, though, with Mannering walking down the high street, and he is saying good morning. He passes the grocer, so he talks to Hodges. He passes Jones at his butcher shop. He has a weird encounter with Frazier at the Undertaker store because he looks in the window, checks his thing, and then you see Frazier come and go, big creepy eyes. Frazier's actor is very good at that. John Laurie. You have to scroll up to see who the actors are. I can't keep track of them. There's like 9 main characters in this show. It's too many. And then he bumps into Wilson, who's going the wrong way, and all this stuff happens about eggs and whatever. Then he bumps into Walker crossing the street, and finally meets Pike at the bank. I kind of like the shot of the just rolling down the high street. That's definitely a movie thing they do that's a little more interesting than the show. Though the main thing I will say about this movie is the Christmas special that also came out this year is no less exciting, no less interesting. It's in fact better. So like, there's no reason this needed to be a movie. It could have just been a special, and not had these weird movie affectations on it that just make it worse. Then we move into the bank with our first little joke and the introduction. of the general, who is specific to this movie, I believe. He's not in any of the TV shows episodes. But he comes in normal dress. He's not in a uniform or anything. And he tries to cash a check for £10, which obviously is not a lot of money now. Apparently it's about £430 now. So I thought I'd do the conversion to make sure. But man, it's an awful lot of money. I can't let you cash that if you're not a member with our bank. So the general is obviously not very happy about that. And he storms out of the bank. He's like, "Damn bank clerk!" And Mannering shouts after him, "I happen to be the manager." I feel like that's something that's funny because of the way Arthur Lowe acts it. He just sticks his head out. Actually, I'll show a clip of that. And then they go into the office. And they're talking about the news of the Nazis have gone round the line. That instead of going through I thought they'd never break through the line. No, they didn't. They just went round it. He's like, dirty nuts. It's funny how he's always putting the Nazis down as if they're cheating, and it's like, well, if you don't defend it, they're going to go round it. Like that's. It's like I like how he gets mad at them for cheating. It's like, well, they did start a pretty big war. So he can't really expect them to play nice. But yeah, I thought that was kind of funny. And then we get into actually really good character development because Mannering tells Wilson to turn the wireless radio on. And Wilson's like, "That's going to be a little bit difficult." He's like, "Stop questioning me." And he's like, "I'll turn it on." Wait a minute. We don't have a wireless, do we? It's like, oh. It's very indicative of the command style of not just Mannering. Some of the higher up generals and stuff will do the same thing of making an order, no matter how ridiculous it is, even when not listening to them being questioned. He says, "You sure that's a good idea, sir?" It's like, "Of course it is." And then everything goes wrong because there was actually a good reason why that person was questioning them. That'll definitely come up later. So they go to the I don't know what sort of store it is, but it's a store that sells radios. And he goes to the shop owner. He's like, "Okay, turn the radio on." So they listen to the radio, and the shop owner's trying to sell him the radio. He's like, "Listen to that clarity. It's very good. Would you like to try a different station?" He's like, "No, stop." As they're listening to this important announcement from someone in the high up of the government. It was a famous radio broadcast. I'm pretty sure it's a real radio broadcast that happened announcing the formation of the Home Guard. And telling the able-bodied men, well, less than able-bodied men, I suppose, because, of course, the Home Guard is for people who were not old enough or too old to be in the regular army or had reserved occupations, so they were required to be in their occupation instead of being at war. So, of course, this is the call to action, fairly similar to the pilot of the show. But there are a few changes. And then he leaves at the end of the broadcast, he leaves the shop, and the shop owner is like, "So, what about the wireless? Do you like to buy it?" He's like, "Don't be ridiculous." As if it's like, what would I be in a shop about to buy a radio? It's very funny. It's very Mannering. Just blunder through. Oh, don't be ridiculous. Take charge. Off he goes. Then just a small little thing. They meet up with Jones going down the street. He's like, "Oh, I just heard the thing. Are you going to sign up?" Like, "Yeah, we're okay. They're going together." And he tells this story about how he got discharged during World War I because his eyesight wasn't very good. It's ridiculous. My eyesight's fine. And then proceeds to walk into a bicycle. It's not the funniest joke, but it's funny. And then so they get to the police station, and it's teeming with men all ready to sign up. And the sergeant, I'm not sure if it's the sergeant, I think it's just the sergeant, yeah, is there, and he's like, "Okay, I'll take your names, and the appointed leader will get back to you." And he's like, "Well, who's that?" He hasn't been appointed yet. I like that. So that gets a positive there. And of course, what ensues is Mannering takes charge of everybody, and he's like, okay, everybody, we're going down to the church hall. We're going to sort this mess out. Leave the police alone. We'll get sorted out by ourselves. And this is, of course, how Mannering becomes the captain. He just sort of appoints himself as the captain, which I guess is supposed to... it drives the plot of him being not the best leader. But he's got a lot of patriotism, I think. So they march all the way down to the church hall. Everybody goes in, and him, Wilson, and then Jones all go into the vicar's office. Similar to the pilot. I can't remember the pilot. I should have watched that maybe to get reference, but whatever. And then we get a reference to Captain Mannering served in the whole of 1919. Of course, World War I ended in 1918. I like that he was serving in the military for the whole of 1919, all the way through the year after the war ended. It's just very funny. And then he puts Wilson second in command, and Jones volunteers to be third in command, which is met with some resistance until he pulls out nice little sausages wrapped up. Because, of course, meat rationing, it's very hard to get any sort of meat. Everybody had little ration cards, so like getting a little extra is always nice. So he gives it to Mannering, and Mannering's like, okay then. And Wilson's questioning a little bit, and then he pulls out another sausages and gives it to Wilson. It's like, I think he'd be okay. Which actually, it seems a little out of character for Jones. I don't remember him doing that in the TV show. I remember him trying to avoid that slightly more than he did. It's a little less overt if it happened. So I don't know. I find that a little questioning. I'm not giving it a negative, but I find it kind of questioning. And I actually have an excellent little clip I want to show just of Thurlow's facial expression to Jones wanting to be third in command. So I'll just put that in here. And then we have them calling up the first man, and Wilson, instead of shouting, "First man up," what he says is, would one of you mind coming in here, please? Which is very Wilson. That's how he acts. And Mannering's like, no, you've got to be more assertive. And so he just shouts the same line. It's like, would you mind coming in here, please? It's the please. It's like, sorry, you want to say please? It's very funny. It's weird also because Wilson is a World War I veteran. Like, he fought in the whole war. So you'd think he'd be used to it, but no, he doesn't fit well into that. But then we have the first... I mean, it's just like the third or fourth time we see Walker, but it's when we really see him pushing something. You saw him on the street earlier. He was trying to sell people petrol coupons. But he's standing there with the case open. He's like, okay, anybody want to buy some knicker elastic? Because elastic was really hard to find in that period. He's got his case, so he's trying to sell it to everybody. And he ends up being the first person who goes into the office, which is kind of weird for him because he didn't go to the police station to sign up with everybody. He just saw a huge mass of people walking. He's like, oh, customers! And he follows them. So he's the first one into the office, and he tries to sell Mannering knicker elastic. He's like, I'll sell you some knicker elastic for the wife. He's like, no, girlfriend? He's like, how dare you? And then it's like, I haven't got a girlfriend. So Walker's response to that is, oh, I can help you there. Which is, I think, at some point, I can't remember if it was earlier in this or not, he does something similar with the petrol coupons. If someone says, I haven't got a car, it's like, oh, I can help you there. Which is very Walker. It's like, if he can't sell you something, he'll try and sell you something else. Which, if it was acted badly, would probably be really irritating, but the way, what's his name? James Beck acts that is spot on. It is really sad that he died 2 years after making this, and we didn't get to see much of his career, or what his career could have been. But then also in signing up, Mannering, I guess, pulls out these forms, sign-up forms, and Wilson is like, "Are you sure you want me to use these?" He's like, "Just stop! Don't be ridiculous." And he starts asking Walker the questions, and the questions, it's a sign-up sheet for the choir. So he's asking, "Oh, are you a baritone or a soprano?" He's like, "Ooh, well," and Walker's answering these questions in a sarcastic manner, which is why I think it's perfect that they picked him to go first and be the one that they realized that they were asking the wrong questions with. It's very funny. So then Mannering starts asking correct questions, and they go through why he's not being called up yet, because he's in a reserved occupation and yada yada yada. There's a little quip about him, army experience. He's like, "Ooh, I had a girlfriend who was in the Salvation Army once," which is a joke they ripped right out of the pilot. A lot of jokes are reused here. But yeah, definitely an excellent way to play that joke and at the same time finish introducing Walker, I suppose. And then they need to get rid of Jones, so Wilson's order is great. It's, "Would you mind going into the hall and lining the men up and doing things with them?" It's very just do something. I kind of like that. And then of course Hodges will show up, goes into the office. He's like, "You get your men out of here. I've got an ARP lecture in 10 minutes." Introducing Hodges as a fairly antagonistic person. He is, of course, the closest thing to a villain Dad's Army has, is just trying to mess with Mannering and make things difficult, or I think it's just a rivalry, really. So that's a good way to introduce him having an issue with Mannering. And of course, during these proceedings, the vicar shows up and is like, "You were in my office." He's like, "Well, you weren't anywhere about. I would have asked, but you weren't anywhere. And this is war. This is an emergency," and all that. So, yeah, just has to introduce the vicar and introduce his role, which is to be irritated that everybody's using his church hall. Then they cut to the Nazis in a big war planning room. I think they just seem to have used just random Nazi generals just planning stuff. But there's a great line that leads into the next scene of the platoon. Is the trouble with the English is they are great organizers, and it got to them being a little disheveled. But we'll talk about that in a minute. Scene change. Okay. So once they get into the hall, they start going down the line of people and sort of introducing them, at least the ones who haven't been introduced. And that brings me to a negative, in which they've removed, part of Godfrey's history and changed it, because he used to be. There was a whole episode of it. He was a conscientious objector, and then he signed up for the medical corps and actually had, medals for. Oh, it's the episode where they all show their medals. Is it? I don't know what episode it is, but yeah, they have a whole episode. He's a conscientious objector. He didn't fight in the war, but he served in the medical corps, and in the movie, he's changed to being a veteran, an Army and Navy veteran, which is a tidbit. It's not really a joke, so I don't know what to say about that, but I don't like it. So yeah, no. Then they keep going down the line, and there's one soldier who showed up with a gun. And he tries Mannering tries to get the gun off him. He's like, "What's your name, soldier?" And General Wilkinson. It's just kind of very funny. Not really sure where the general was when Mannering took charge, but there you go. The general is written out of the plot later on because he falls asleep. So I'm not even sure why they put him there in the first place. He's just a vehicle for the gun, I suppose, and a joke. That's kind of a funny joke, but other than that. Oh, God. Then Frank's mother arrives. And we get another negative because for no obvious reason they recast her. I might have read at one point they cast her because they wanted a better looking woman. Yeah, that would make sense, except that she's in relations with a rather old person. I mean, Wilson isn't completely elderly yet, but he's on his way there. He's in the upper reaches of middle age. So making her prettier seems like a weird choice. And considering that every single other person was not recast and is still the original person they were in the series, it seems very strange. Though actually there was one thing that was recast, but we'll get to that later. And then they have a fun little bit where the Germans are drawing up their invasion plans, and it's intercut with the platoon doing their sort of joke defense plans. It's like some posted at the Novelty Rock Emporium, and the specific businesses which have obviously been chosen to be funny, and it's quite a good joke. And I just put in a negative for filler. There's a lot of filler in this movie, so let's put it in somewhere. And then there's a great bit where I'm having trouble remembering everyone's name. The old one, Jones, is out on patrol, and he comes across a man out in the dark. He's like, "Show me your identification," and then they go through this whole thing. It's like, "Have you got a light?" "No, I haven't got a light." "Oh, I got a lighter." Which I actually assumed Jones, being Jones, was going to light the thing on fire, and I almost still seem to assume that even when I rewatch it, but he didn't. And then he goes to it, and he's like, "Yes, oh yes, this is who you are." Sees the identification, gives it back to the person, and then Jones has a tribal spear at this point in the movie because they haven't got their guns yet. That's the whole plot thing. And he's given it to the man he was checking the ID of. So the guy was, "Oh, sorry, here's your thing." And the guy walks away. And then Jones calls back to him, "Oi, Fred, I'll have you meet round in the morning." And it's like, why did you go through the whole thing of identifying him if you knew who he was? But it's very Jones. It's very by the book. "Oh, yes, we're going to do it by the book." Yes, okay. And then Fred goes off. That's pretty funny. And then we get into the important plot point of making the movie exciting. So the Reverend gets a call round from some movers, I guess. They come to collect his bells. Apparently they take all but one of the bells and smelt them down to make weapons because they're running low on metal at this point in the war. And then so the Reverend, who's apparently a keen campanologist, which is evidently the term for bell ringing, wants to ring his bells for the last time, so he rings the bells. Of course, the church bells are the signal for an invasion. So the Home Guard automatically assume that there's an invasion and mobilize, which leads us into the recasting. I bring up again, in that they have a completely different van than they did in the TV show. I don't know what happened there. I'm not really going to give it a negative because it doesn't really affect it. It's just really weird. I don't know if there must have been some sort of weird contract with the van that they had on the ownership and they couldn't use it again. Because it's not like they didn't have it. They filmed the stuff later that same year with the same van, but no, we couldn't get it. But in the Christmas special that year, it's there. So I do not know what happened there. Some weird bureaucratic thing, no doubt. Strange thing. And then they proceed to build barricaded furniture across the street. And then they hear what they assume is gunfire, which actually turns out to be the people with the bells and their very, very, very backfiring truck. I mean, it's ridiculous how much that thing backfires. And they come, it's like, no, it's just he was ringing them because he was wanting to say goodbye. Okay. And they all break it down. And then, oh, yeah, we come to a line, which they stole from an episode, which is delivered very poorly at a random point. So the ARP warden, whose name I am forgetting, I think I wrote it down. Hodges. Yes, Hodges shows up. He's all up in arms about the fact that they've blocked off a road, as he would be. Which leads to I think it was an early episode. There was a thing where Mannering says to him, "Keep your hands off my privates," when Hodges wasn't touching any of them because they stole the line from something else, so it didn't fit. They were just reusing a joke. It's just why bother? So we have a little weird cut. This is the thing in this movie is they just keep cutting. Like, they just do this random thing. Oh, no, throw it away. Next thing. Cutting. But anyway, so they cut to this weird scene where the German general comes up round on the French cliff in his staff car. Oh, excuse me. And then there's Wilson and Mannering on the other side, which is ridiculous because I'm pretty sure you can't see across the channel. But that's... Maybe I'm wrong. I was under the impression you could not see across the channel. You can see both sides if you're in the middle, but you can't see across it, is what I thought. But then the staff car drives off, all professional-like, and then you see Mannering and Wilson deliberately reach down, put on their bicycle clips, clip their pants legs back, they pick the bikes up, and off they go. It's very... And they do it in a very upstanding British kind of way, but it's just very funny. It goes back to the scene with the intercutting between the invasion and the defense. I'm not actually going to give that a positive. I just think it's worth mentioning. So right after that, they lead into... Oh, I cannot remember these people's names. Frazier and Walker. Frazier and Walker are in Frazier's store, and Walker's trying to sell him cheap knockoff handles for coffins. And he's like, "Those will rust through in 3 days." And to which Walker replies, "Well, who's going to see him? I take your point. I'll take a dozen." And then they hear fighter planes coming across. Better make that 2 dozen. I guess that's going to be like an aggregate positive with the last one. So. Then they have this weird scene, which is, I'm assuming, them slowly getting their uniforms, which is a little ridiculous. I'm sure they would get them all at the same time. But they're marching down a street, marching. Random jump cut. Marching, still marching in the same place, but there was a random cut for no reason. I don't know if I missed something, but it was really weird. And then they're marching in their official underwear, under, those huge, like, full-on underdress, like, sleeves, everything. And then they get the shirts on, they get some pants as they keep cutting it, just to show them getting their uniforms. And then we have the return of the general from earlier, not the general in the platoon, the other general, who they have a little run-in with when they're testing a oil trap device, and Jones, being Jones, accidentally lets it out all over the road. Staff car comes around the corner, spins around, and the general... Mannering comes up to the window. He's like, "You okay, sir?" He's like, "It's that damn bank clerk." Very funny. And then is it AAA? AAA man shows up. Oh, I'm sorry, I've skipped a bit. They converted the bus van thing to run on gas. Not sure what sort of gas, but it's all in a big balloon above the van, and they accidentally puncture it because their routine, when the bus had a roof that wasn't covered by a giant bag, was you stick the bayonets up the top. Yeah. Mannering accidentally blows his whistle, which is the signal to do that, and through the roof punctures the bag, and they have none. And then the AAA man, who's like, breakdown service, comes along, and very rudely, he's like, "You don't want me. You want the gas man." It's like, well, that's not very helpful, is it? I don't know what was up with that guy. He's just being completely facetious. It's like, off he goes. Just, who cares? I don't know why they put that in the movie. Just people being rude. It's strange. And so because of that, they have to get a traction steam engine. I don't know if you've ever seen them. It's basically a steam flattener thing. What are those called? Steamrollers. It's a steamroller. And it basically runs on steam. And so they use that to tow the van to the training they're going to. They then arrive at the field. And then Jones, because of course they put Jones in charge of the damn thing, loses control. And off they go into the field. There's all these men lined up. Their kit, their tents, their mess tins and everything, all lined up nicely. Crunch, 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 all over. Flattens all the tents. Which leads to quite a funny joke when the commanding officer comes in. He's like, "Ooh, that's all right. You were the ones who are going to sleep in those tents anyway." So they get, their comeuppance. Everybody else gets the comeuppance that Jones deserved, but never mind. And then there's a weird scene with the general ends up floating down a river sitting on a horse. Yeah, that's very weird. And then after the whole fiasco, so there's a lot of training stuff that's not very interesting that happens. They head back to the church hall, where, unbeknownst to them, some Nazi paratroopers have arrived and taken a group of, I think they were raising money to buy a Spitfire. They're like, well, we thought we'd buy a Spitfire, but turns out Spitfires are very expensive. So what we're going to do is we're going to buy half a Spitfire, and the other town is going to buy the other half of this. Anyway, the paratroopers come in, and they take hostages. Mannering tries to get in, and the Reverend tries to tell him that there's something going on, and the only way they finally find out is because Hodges managed to sneak out of the bathroom and tell the platoon that there's paratroopers in there, and all this panic. So they call the regular military. The regular military shows up. It's like, ooh, it's a big job. Better call the Navy. I don't know why they decided to call them Navy. So then they also call the Marines. Then they call the police. And then, what's it? Is it the fire? I think. Then they call the fire brigade. Then they call an ambulance. That's just like, so they just end up with every different service there. I'm surprised they didn't call the Coast Guard. But then, while they were all arguing and all that, the platoon goes and dresses up as in the choir outfits, and then walks out, and they're singing. They're actually singing what they're gonna do. And he's like, "Then I take his gun," and which is very funny. And you think the Germans would catch on, but maybe they don't speak English very well, which would make sense. So they come in and then they grab it and they save the day, and the military's like, "Oh, good job, everybody!" And yeah, just heroes. Nice heroic ending for the episode. It feels kind of forced, to be honest. I mean, I like the whole segment, but they just throw it in at the end, and it's just heroic. This movie is very broken. Like, it's just a bunch of weird things stuck together that don't really fit. And it's probably the weakest thing Ned's Army did, if you exclude the recent movie. We're not going to talk about that one. Though I will say the recent movie was very well cast. It just wasn't very funny because it's not the original cast. And this movie, of course, then ends with them reenacting that walking down the street in the morning thing they did at the beginning, Mannering saying hello, 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 hello to everybody. Sort of, I do like that symmetry. The symmetry is nice, but it really can't save this movie. Though it does have some funny moments, quite a few funny moments actually. I still don't like this. I am kind of glad to be done with it. So next week we'll be doing Battle of the Giants, the Christmas special of Dad's Army that year, which actually you should make this point now, has better action sequences than the movie. The movie special, or TV special, has better action than the theatrical film. Why bother making a film if you're not going to even make it as good as the TV show? It's ridiculous. I'm sorry. Rant over. See you next week.